Hello viewers, this is part 2 of our discussion of The Home and the World by Rabindranath Tagore. In the first part of our discussion, we examined the background to the novel, major characters in the novel and some important aspects of Rabindranath Tagore's life and the Swadeshi movement. In this part, we will discuss characterization in the novel, study important themes in the novel and try and understand the philosophical problems of the novel. The novel has many characters, themes and concerns. The three main characters are Sandeep, Nikhil and Bimla. There are many other minor characters also and we will discuss them later. The novel has many important themes, one of them is friendship. Today we will discuss and analyze the characters and various aspects of the novel The Home and the World, which is undisputedly the finest work of Tagore. The protagonist, Nikhilesh, who obviously represents Tagore, is a magnanimous and progressive zamindar. Nikhil is a rich zamindar who shares neither the chauvinistic attitude of the male society nor is he a womanizer like other people. He is kind, he is caring and idealistic. He is not only a devoted husband but wants his traditional wife Bimla to share a relationship of equality with him. Introducing his wife to Western and modern thoughts, he encourages her to go out of the zenana and interact with the world. He feels deeply for his people and believes in the value of education and is free from any racial, religious or class prejudices. He deeply loves his country, thinks strongly against the British rule and had practiced self-reliance and Swadeshi well before it became trendy among the other people. But at the same time, Nikhil believes that giving too much emphasis to the patriotic pride is morally treacherous and thus not support the coercive politics of his nationalist and hardliner friend Sandeep. Rowing against the tide of emotionally charged nationalistic politics of the time, Nikhil gets increasingly isolated from the situation and also from his wife Bimla. Bimla starts getting attracted by Sandeep's charismatic personality. Nikhil takes exception to Sandeep when he forces the poor and innocent villagers to buy Swadeshi goods which are expensive and inferior in quality to the goods manufactured in Lancashire or Manchester. Nikhil acts as a true humanitarian in the novel. Pure at heart, Nikhil knows no racial, religious, class or sexual prejudice. As a zamindar, he never misuses his office or wealth, but rather as a benevolent patriarch, he offers his utmost services to uplift the condition of his people. Nikhil and Sandeep understand the concept of patriotism that should lead to an independent Bengal from different and exclusive perspectives. Sandeep worships Bengal as a goddess and would have no qualms in doing anything for the cause, even stealing. Nikhil disapproves of Sandeep's attitude. He prefers to see his land in human terms. Therefore, his actions are always regulated by ethics. The central character, Bimla, is torn between the duties owed to husband Nikhil and the demands made on her by the radical leader Sandeep. Her attempts to resolve the irreconcilable pressures of the home and the world reflect the conflict in India itself, and the tragic outcome foreshadows unrest that accompanied the partition in 1947. Bimla is perhaps the most lively character of the story. She is the center of action as well as attraction of the novel, and she is kept alive on a delicate thread of love amid the fire and fury of politics. Bimla is the queen of love, so engaging yet so tense, and psychologically so intricate yet so interesting. Presented as the wife of an aristocratic man, she is drawn as no paragon of beauty but a plain wife, married into the conservative Raja family. Indeed, Bimla was no woman of beauty. In her own admission, she had a dark complexion and lacked physical beauty. Yet, she was fortunate enough to get married into a Raja's house just because she had some favorable astrological signs in her. It was predicted that when she would turn out to be an ideal wife, and that is why Nikhil's family chose to marry him to her. She was fortunate enough to get a loving husband who was devoted but not authoritarian. She could have from him not merely love but earnest help to make herself a cultivated, advanced and modern woman. Tagore has drawn no flat character in his heroine Bimla. She is a round character that changes with the transition of events and situations. That change in Bimla occurred with the arrival of Sandeep, Nikhil's friend, in the wake of the Swadeshi movement. He appeared to her as a hero of the Swadeshi movement. She was overwhelmed, hypnotized, as revealed in her own expression. Bimla was fascinated by Sandeep's external glamour and show and never truly loved him. She returned to Nikhil, the dear center of her love and life, when she learnt the truth about Sandeep. By allowing Bimla freedom of choice, Tagore has highlighted the potential of Indian women and their right to emancipation. According to Sandeep, nature surrenders herself but only to the robber, for she delights in this forceful desire, this forceful abduction. Sandeep was not moved by the love for country but by self-interest. Sandeep's love of the country is but a phase of his covetous self-love. He is never ashamed. He asks for whatever he wants and he does not always wait to ask before he takes it. What he desires positively, superlatively. He says, I want to knead it with both my hands and both my feet. I want to smear it all over my body. I want to gorge myself with it to the full. Sandeep says he would conceal nothing because that would be cowardly. But if he cannot bring himself to conceal when concealment is needful, that also is cowardly. Because you have your greed, you build your walls. Because I have my greed, I break through them. You use your power, I use my craft. These are the realities of life. On these depend kingdoms and empires and all the great enterprises of men. These are the words of Sandeep in the novel. He does not hesitate to instruct his followers to sink a poor Muslim boatsman's boat, since the boatman refused to carry Swadeshi goods and insisted on carrying foreign goods. He was afraid that he would lose his only source of income if he carried only Swadeshi goods. Sandeep provokes his young followers to accentuate Hindu-Muslim divides and create the conditions for a violent communal riot that eventually wounds Nikhil when he tries to quell the riot. Sandeep is so recklessly selfish and unscrupulous that he does not hesitate to woo his friend's wife while living under his roof, or to incite her to rob her own husband. Anita Desai is right in pointing out that in his vanity, arrogance, greed and nihilism, Sandeep resembles nothing so much as the conventional blackguard of the Indian stage or the Bombay cinema, stroking his handlebar moustache as he gloats over a bag of gold and a cowering maiden. Bararani. Bimla and her sister-in-law's relationship is strained at best. Bimla's sister-in-law causes a lot of tension in the household. Bararani also uses Nikhil to get the material items that she desires. Bimla constantly complains about her to Nikhil. Bararani taunts Bimla for her mingling with Sandeep Babu. Amulya. Tagore uses Amulya to symbolize the raw emotion and passion, yet lack of sympathy for others, often encompassed by group or riot mentality. Tagore also characterizes Amulya as the typical idealistic youth. When Amulya rationalizes the murder with a phrase from the Bhagavad Gita saying, "Who kills the body kills not," Amulya is used as a parallel to Sandeep, comparing follower to leader. Bimla calls him little brother. Amulya struggles, as any youth, between completing the goals of the movement and developing strong relationships on an individual level, such as with Bimla. This is made extremely difficult by Sandeep's powerful influence. Amulya frequently accepts Sandeep's motives by rationalizing the necessary actions. In a sense, he can be considered a pawn used by Bimla and Sandeep in their strategic power struggle, particularly when Bimla requests him to steal her jewels. Grandmother. As Nikhil's parents had died long ago and his old grandmother was the mistress of the house, Nikhil was the apple of her eye and the jewel in her bosom. And so he never met with much difficulty in overstepping any of the ancient usages. That noble lady had come into the house at the age of 8 and had died in her 79th year. She had not spent a happy life. Fate had hurled shaft after shaft at her breast, only to draw out more and more the imperishable spirit within. This great house was hallowed with her tears. Miss Gilby. Nikhil brings in Miss Gilby to teach Bimla and be her companion. When Miss Gilby first came to their house, there was a great flutter, which afterwards calmed down when they got used to her. Later, the whole thing was stirred up afresh due to the Swadeshi movement. Bimla had never bothered herself before as to whether Miss Gilby was European or Indian, but she began to do so later under the influence of Sandeep and other leaders. When Miss Gilby is humiliated by Sandeep's men, who have been indoctrinated with nationalist lunacy, it is Nikhil who extends his love and support to her. To him, Miss Gilby is another flesh and blood human being just like himself, not just a European to be perceived through a mist of abstraction or an enemy of Bengal simply because she happens to be a white woman. Panchu. Panchu, the tenant of a neighboring zamindar of Nikhil, was extremely poor. He was devoted to Nikhil's master. He is up before dawn every day and with a basket of pan leaves, twists of tobacco, coloured cotton yarn, little combs, looking glasses and other trinkets which women love, he wades through knee-deep waters of the marsh and goes over to the Namasudra quarters. There he barters his goods for rice, which fetches him a little more than their price in money. If he can get back soon enough, he goes out again after a hurried meal to the sweetmeat sellers, where he assists in beating sugar for wafers. As soon as he comes home, he sits at his shell, bangle making, plodding on often till after midnight. All this cruel toil does not earn for himself or his family a bare 2 meals a day during much more than half a year. His method of eating is to begin with a good filling draught of water, and his staple food is the cheapest kind of seedy banana, and yet the family has to go with only one meal a day for the rest of the year. Friendship. Sandeep and Nikhil were two childhood friends growing to adulthood. Sandeep becomes a freedom fighter, while Nikhil, the heir to a small kingdom, becomes a Raja, who is a feudal zamindar or a landlord. The two had not met each other since their college days. They only met after Nikhil's marriage. Sandeep is single and quite a philanderer. Then he suddenly enters and demands things from Nikhil. Rather imperturbably, he declares that he wants to operate his people's movement of boycotting British articles sold in the market from Nikhil's palace. Sandeep also unilaterally declares Nikhil's wife Bimla the spiritual inspiration of the movement. Thus, he is depicted as misusing his friendship with Nikhil. The other theme in the novel is the theme of change, especially in Bimla. When Bimla falls in love with Sandeep, she slowly weans away from her traditional housewife role. She becomes more daring, more confidently brushes off her sister-in-law's criticisms and goes outside the women's quarters of the house. She easily converses with other men like Sandeep. Through her dilemma, the readers are able to understand and learn about the traditional ways of the Indian household. Through Bimla's change from the good housewife to an independent, more modern woman, later Bimla realizes that Sandeep has no interest in her and that he was merely using her for political and financial needs. In the novel, the three main characters, Bimla, Nikhil and Sandeep, retrospectively narrate the vicissitudes of life that they experienced during the onslaught of the Swadeshi movement. Bimla, Nikhil's wife, is captivated by Sandeep's rhetoric and flamboyance. The nationalistic rhetoric is shown to be capable of gathering large crowds, hypnotizing the masses, but shown to be nowhere moving towards the aim of reuniting Bengal. By employing Panchu as a subtext, Tagore articulates that the movement is insensitive to the condition of the poor. Completely hypnotized by the war cry of Bande Mataram, the patriots forced the poor traders to stop dealing in foreign goods. If anyone did not agree, then their goods were burnt down. Thus, instead of bailing the poor out of their pitiable condition, the nation lovers worsened their condition by forcing the poison of patriotism down their throats. On the one hand, Nikhil, echoing Western ideas on the role of women in society, wants to bring Bimla out of the parda into the world at the peak of the Swadeshi movement. He wants her to become her own independent self. Therefore, his aim is not only to bedeck her with all the riches money can buy, but also to educate her. This new Bengali woman that Nikhil had in mind was to be molded not after Sita, the traditional and submissive wife in the Ramayana, but Durga, the goddess of Bengal. His desire to see her as a free woman who will choose to love him not because custom dictates it but of her own accord makes him take these steps to bring her into the outside world. As Desai explains, Tagore depicts Nikhil urging Bimla out of the parda to which she has been confined by custom. He seems to be coaxing Bengal out of orthodoxy into modernity on the way to a new independent India. However, the new role of women that comes to represent the new style of the nation will be subjected to different interpretations. While Nikhil wants Bimla to make her own choices freely, Sandeep worships her as a goddess of Bengal. As such, she will become the symbol of their movement, but also subjected to their desires and decisions. What Nikhil refuses to do is to glorify Bengal at the cost of attacking foreign nations. He refuses to be inflamed as Sandeep and Bimla have been. At the time, many people understood it as Tagore's insincerity in attacking the colonial powers. Actually, the actions of the three characters dramatize the views on nationalism that Tagore expressed in a series of lectures on the topic delivered between 1916 and 1917. In these lectures, he draws a parallel between the way nationalism was understood in the West and in India. Tagore expresses the view that in India, the main problems were not related to fights for political supremacy as they were in the West, but they had to do with social life and the attainment of spiritual ideals. The novel is an interesting allegory of Indian politics in the early 20th century. As a means of encouraging his wife Bimla to emerge into the outer world, Nikhil introduces her to Sandeep, an active leader in the Swadeshi movement. Bimla soon becomes immersed in the revolutionary fervour of Swadeshi and finds herself torn between the duties of home and the world. The Home and the World is a tragic example of the conflict between realism and idealism. Tagore's task is to save the Indians spiritually and to protect their souls from the dangers posed by the violence and deceit with which they are waging their struggle for freedom. He writes, "Men who die for the truth are immortal, and if a whole people dies for the truth, it will achieve immortality in the history of mankind." The plot of the novel contains a number of interesting philosophical problems, which can be discussed without spoiling the particular events of the novel. In defense of his position, Sandeep cites the example of the advice that Lord Krishna gave to a hesitant Arjuna prior to the great battle in the Mahabharata, which is the great Indian epic poem. This advice, encapsulated in the Bhagavad Gita, encourages a man to perform his rightful duty without thought for any of the consequences, or as we say in India, the fruit of the action. Tagore is concerned about the ease with which this maxim can be subverted to unpleasant ends. This position, which is skeptical of the Gita, is rare in Indian rhetoric to this day. As Amartya Sen notes in the Argumentative Indian, indeed, the tragic desolation that the post-combat and post-carnage land, largely the Indo-Gangetic plain, seems to face towards the end of the Mahabharata can even be seen as something of a vindication of Arjuna's profound doubts. Arjuna's contrary arguments are not really vanquished, no matter what the message of the Bhagavad Gita is meant to be. With this, we come to the end of our discussion of part 2 of The Home and the World. In this part, we have looked at important characters and themes in the novel. We hope you enjoyed this discussion. Thank you.